Welcome back to Pathways and Possibilities, the podcast where we explore how design, technology, and education come together to shape more equitable futures for our students. I'm Selena, a researcher focusing on creating career learning experiences that are reflective, inclusive, and responsive to the realities of young people today. Now, today's episode is called The Power of Pause, understanding how reflection helps students make sense of who they are becoming today. Now, today's guest speaker will be Antwan McHenry, a Student Voice Liaison.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about the student voice.
Absolutely. So, for the audience, tell us about yourself.
I have been an employee of Chicago Public Schools, wrapping up my 21st year. Started in 2024. Seems like yesterday. Started out as a substitute teacher,
Okay.
and I got downsized from corporate America. When the .com bubble was going. And just decided that I would, do it until I found another job in corporate America. But, so it's funny. It's like, you say you make your plans and then God laughs at them. So
Yep.
I ended up becoming a tennis clerk at an elementary school. A year passed, 2 years passed, 5 years passed, 10 years passed, and it ended up being, 16 years on the elementary school level, which I did student voice there.
Okay.
Then 2019 came along, new principal and new direction. So I decided to try my hand at healthcare, and then this thing called the pandemic came.
Right.
And I
And
worked
changed everybody's lives.
right, and I was at Rush Hospital for 2.5 years, and this is my third year back at CPS. So, and I'm doing student voice with my high school students now.
And so what I hear is like you help. So to me, just even with that history, it feel like the trajectory that you continue to be on is one of helping people. So thank you for that, and thank you for your service. If the kids don't appreciate it and say thank you, let me say thank you. So can you share your role as a student liaison? What does that really looks like? And then I don't know if it's different from middle school versus high school, but even if we talk about from like 6th to 12th grade, what does that look like?
Oh yeah, even the elementary school and high school version is very different. Elementary school students are a little bit more excited. They're a little bit more eager. They're more available. High schoolers, since they're older, they have more independence, and they have more going on. They're trying to work a job. They're trying to get in regular and after school clubs, and so it's a little bit harder to keep them on the wheel of student voice. So it's fulfilling. I think it's just a little bit more work, but you get to have different levels of conversations with them, because on the elementary school level, you may be talking about, okay, which color do you think is best for the wall?
Mhm.
With high school students, you may be talking about, I don't think I see the principal enough around the school. So the dynamics are a little bit different because they're older, so they can ask more advanced questions.
And so are you actually are you like an advocate, like a student advocate, or are you just trying to get the kids to kind of blend into the environment?
I'm kind of like a connector between the student voice department downtown and central office. So I'm kind of the in school person to kind of help thrust student voice. I believe within, if not next year, in the next couple of years, each CPS school has to have a student voice department or liaison, somebody to kind of connect with the students and kind of like push the vision of student voice, which is, it's kind of like student government. You're getting them
Right.
to use their voices to basically say, what we feel is important, because oftentimes adults make all the decisions, and
Yes.
they decide what's going to go and what's best, and what sounds good and what looks good. But the student voice committee actually asks, well, what do the students, which I've learned to say, to share with my colleagues, what are the customers saying? Because
Hmm.
the students are the customers, and
Absolutely.
they should have some kind of say so in what goes on in the school. So I'm kind of like that in between person between central office um, and the students, but also with school administration. Um, because we're supposed to sit down with school administration after our meetings, share our
Mhm.
findings, share the things that what we're doing, and coming to the table together. So just kind of like I'm a middleman between a couple of different entities.
And I like that because in my research, I talk about there's this methodology called co-design, and basically what it means is that when you're designing for a particular audience, you actually need their input. And so in a
Mhm.
school environment, it's all about the students, right? So you're trying to provide an experience for them, and a lot of times their voices are not heard. And I can just imagine, the tension among the kids when their voice is not heard. So what that student liaison is a great idea. So when you think about, like the power of pause when we're talking about kids and, because now they, and so do you feel like the power of pause, is it the adults pausing or the kids pausing? But I just want to kind of understand when we talk about the power of pause, what does that phrase mean, especially in a school context? And you have like you in this weird space because you're like you got the kids and you have the adults and trying to get them to coexist. One of the things we talk about is in that co-design a process is the kids are the experts sometimes, and sometimes adults
Mhm.
have problems with that. So if you can talk a little bit about what you think the power of pause mean.
Well, I think the power of pause means thinking before you speak, because a lot of times, and children are very open and honest,
Mhm.
and a lot of times they don't think about what they say before they're going to say it. They don't think about how it's going to affect somebody. They just kind of blurt their truth out or what they think about it. And also adults too, because sometimes we think that adults are just so advanced, so they just don't say whatever. We experienced that on a school level as well. So for me, like the power of pause means just thinking about what you're going to say, thinking
Mhm.
about how it's going to affect somebody, and just just kind of meditating first, because it's not always wise to just blurt out and say whatever, um, in the tone, um, using the kind of words. So just always reminding students, like, you really need to think about what you're going to say, think about the environment, who's there, is it being recorded, is it
Right.
being streamed, and like something, sometimes there are certain things that you can put out there that you can't, once they're out there, you
That's it.
cannot erase them. You think you can erase them, but they've been screenshotted before you pulled it down.
Right.
So so for me, the power of pause means thinking before you say something, before you post something, and just
Mhm.
kind of not letting your emotions be in the driver's seat.
And that's interesting because like we talk about this thing about reflection and allowing kids to voice themselves and even reflect on things. And I'm just wondering, like, you know, and especially when they're younger, and I'm assuming the younger they are, the harder that reflection is. And then containment, like you said, when should I actually voice how I feel when I'm reflecting on things? How does that, when is the appropriate time? And I'm for sure, adults still struggle with that, but then younger kids who haven't learned that discipline, how do they actually learn, like, okay, when do I actually pause? When am I able to reflect? Because reflection for me, I really feel like that's important. That's some part of the research that I'm doing where we're kind of like making sure that as kids navigate through, the different journeys and the different experiences that they have, that they're actually
Mhm.
reflecting on that. And so if you can kind of comment about how, what have you seen when students are trying to understand when they're able to voice themselves or when are they able to reflect on what's going on, and then kind of even navigating the complex personal and academic identities, because I believe sometimes those are two separate things. You have, the academics where I can come to the school and I can shut off the outside world, but then you also have that influence of the environments that they're in, and how that, now you have these two different identities, and how our kids are able to voice and reflect on those and still stay focused.
Mhm. I know academically, because I know I'm not in the classroom, but you go to different professional developments and things like that. And of course, the thrust also is to make students partners in
Mm,
creating their classroom environment and their curriculum. Of course, there are some things that the state mandates that the teacher has to designate and the subject matter and things like that. But you're also supposed to try to design the way you teach um,
Hmm.
around the students and how they feel and get their input and design lessons that allow them to add to the lesson so that they
Yes.
can feel like they're part of it and it's not just you teaching. I know that from just working with students, I know that their mindset is that adults control everything, and
Yes.
and we don't have any say in anything. We just have to do what you say, and just thinking, well, this is not fair. So you just have to kind of create a space where their voices are heard, whether that's a suggestion box or whether that's a parking lot in the classroom. And you just have to put it all together, like, okay, what is the state mandating or the board mandating that I do? But also, what kind of how can I get input from my students so that I can
Right.
design this curriculum and a lesson so that it's relevant to them and that they can understand. So just like you said, it's kind of a balancing act of letting the students know that even though I am the designated person that's in charge in the classroom, that your voice is still important and that you do have some kind of say so. And
Right.
sometimes that is difficult for adults
Hmm.
because adults know they have the power and say,
Hmm.
I'm the teacher, I'm the grown up, and just because I say so, just like if you're a parent or whatever,
Right.
I'm the adult and this is I say so, and understanding that does not always fit. So
Right.
sometimes you have to pause as the
Hmm.
adult, as the person that's in charge, and say, you know what, this is not going to come off well. This is going to actually turn somebody's mind off. So you need to pause sometimes when you're in control and say, you know what, how is this going to affect my customers/students? And that's what in leading student voice discussions, they say the board has a wonderful curriculum. It has questions and generators and leads and that. But sometimes you need to ask the students, well, what do you think student voice is? Of course, you have your
Right.
canned definition of what we're supposed to be doing, but that could be totally different on the paper than what they think.
And so so you said a lot of things like, so where like, I love the idea that you guys are using like multiple platforms to actually get their voices, the student box, having them, fill out information. Of those, which one do you think really kind of work? And are the adults really listening? Because I know that the challenge, as I research more about education, there is this barrier and structure that you kind of got to go through, that sometimes it stops progress. And so the voices of the
Mhm.
students are not heard. And when their voices are not heard, I can just imagine the kids, like, what is their response to when, okay, now you've given me these platforms to express how I feel about certain situations, but then now that we've done that, there's no result, right? And so the idea that you guys have all this methods of collecting this data from these kids, um which one do you think make is the best practice within your particular school? And then how does the kids feel when those voices are not heard?
I think the least effective are is electronic surveys.
Really?
Because they are surveyed and questionnaire to death. Not only them, but teachers.
Gotcha.
I know the Board of Education, they have something called My School, My Voice. And they give it to from elementary school students to high school students. And they help generate the information for the school report cards. An example of
Okay.
a question may be, do you feel safe?
Uh-huh.
Or or uh, or is do you understand lessons? It's very structured. it,
Hmm.
it does not have a lot of room for
So it's almost
creativity.
contained. Yeah.
Super contained, and I think that is the most least effective. Now
Hmm.
what I think is most effective from working with student voice committee is listening to what the students say is and just listening,
Hmm.
because they will tell you even without
Right.
you asking. They will run down and but I think the challenge in that is being the adult and sitting and being quiet. And
Hmm.
when you may feel attacked, no, not you may feel, you will feel attacked because they're
Exactly.
going to come down that line and it's going to be unfiltered, and you have to be able to pause and listen and be
Right.
like, okay, and not want to retort everything they say. For example, I have my student voice students that they're sophomores.
Mhm.
three sophomore IB students, very opinionated, very
Mhm.
high functioning, kind of like the top of the school echelon or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And they told me, they're like, you know what, we don't see administration enough,
Oh. Mhm.
and the visibility. And you would think kids are not paying attention to
Right.
administrators being in the hallways and on the floors, but they are. We think
And it's
they are.
interesting that you say that because I can remember as a kid, I don't want to see administration. I don't want to see the principal. And so it's a different time and age where the kids are like, yeah, I want to see that. That's very interesting.
And they so you take that feedback, and of
Mhm.
course I was sitting down with the culture and climate committee, kind of sharing some of my findings. And I was talking with administration, and I said, my suggestion, I was like, I think you need to be in the hall more.
Mhm. Okay.
And we just finished a mental health event called Talk to Walk, where students were in the courtyard and writing affirmations and positive things. And I think a couple of administrators were at meetings where they can come out. But one in particular, I was like, I need 5 minutes of your time.
Mhm.
And he came to the courtyard, and I told him, I said, the students need to see you at these events.
Right.
And he paused and listened, and
Okay.
viewed the drawings and the sayings, and was able to talk with the students, and that meant a lot to them. So as the adult, you have to be willing to, even when you think you know everything. You got the administrators, they got their masters and their doctorate degrees, and sometimes you can't tell people anything. And I'm like, okay, I know you got all your certifications,
Right.
but your customer,
Your
which is
kids,
the
that's
student,
right.
says they don't see you enough. They want you to be more involved. And they were actually shocked. They were like, "Really?" I
Right. Because
said, "Yeah,
that's
because
that would
just
be
like you
my takeaway.
said,
I'm like, the kids don't want to see administration.
they want, they don't." And they was like, "Wow." I was like, and then as an administrator, they share, what, there's been a lot going on, and
Right.
I know I haven't been as visible, and I'm tied up, and there's a lot going. The teacher contract negotiations were going on, so just the environment, and that, but took the feedback, and one members of the administration came out and was visible. But you got to be consistent. So that
Right.
whole pause and listening is like, okay, kids are gonna tell you what they think, but you have
Right.
to be willing to listen. And also, just like you said, the implementation, like, okay, we're not just listening, we're gonna actually react, and we're gonna actually try to implement some things. So yeah, very important. So I think those town hall meetings where you have to listen, the in-person sit downs, most effective.
And so the incident where the kid wanted to see the administration and he came out, and kudos to him for even just taking a pause to come out because he heard you. And again, I'm gonna say your position, that position to be able to be an advocate for the kids is amazing. So did that make the child trust you more? Like, because you heard them, but then sometimes you can have, a person, one administrator, one person, or one teacher that hears you, but then they hear you and they don't do anything with it. And so it's amazing that you actually went and did it and the person responded to you. I'm just wondering, did you see a difference in that kids afterwards?
Yeah, because they feel like what they actually say matters. Because
Mhm.
most of the time they're thinking, "Oh, you just listen to us talking. You're not going to say anything." But part of my job as being that connector is to sit down with administration and say, "Okay, the kids don't like this, or they don't think this is a good idea." And when I tell them, of course, I'm hoping as well that
Right.
the administrator would be like,
Um,
what, this is a good
yeah.
idea, or this is something that we can make happen, and it actually happen, and the wheels start turning. So, part of my prayer is like, okay, my position with administration, okay, being that connector, like hoping that they'll listen to me and not blow me off as well, because that could happen too. And then what am I going to go back and tell my students? That would kind of like solidify in their minds that, okay, nobody really listens. So I'm really glad that the administrator did listen and made themselves visible. So hopefully that continues, because
Right.
there's a particular set of students that want to see administrators, especially in the Hallway High School students, because with things like the change trends and people
Mhm.
want to be in the halls. Students that I think that are IB students and students who don't get in a lot of trouble, they like to see authority figures to make them feel safe.
Huh.
So even if
Interesting.
for nothing else, they want to see grown-ups around the building, especially, transition time so that they can feel safe.
Okay, that is interesting, and I never thought about that. Because again, like I said, I was like, why would you want to have administration around? But that is interesting in certain scenarios, like it's a safety issue, and so that's interesting and it's almost kind of, I don't know, it feels heavy because then it's also like, why do they need that to feel safe? What is going on to make them feel not safe? And so
Hmm.
that becomes a whole nother issue. I'm assuming with the schools as well.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
this space that you guys are creating for the kids, is it, so do each school do something different? Because I'm just curious about, like how do you, because and then it's an ongoing process of constantly, listening to the kids, trying to decide which part to implement. And in schools
Hmm.
that are under resourced, I'm for sure they even struggle more. But I wonder, like, is there a set structure curriculum, or is it like organic where you each school is kind of doing something totally different?
Right. I think the general vision of CPS is the same in their student voice, but I think the implementation varies from school to school, administrator to administrator. Because last year, we did school administrator, when we did student voice, we spent a lot of time on structure.
uh,
Like, okay, who's going to take the minutes? Who's
right.
going to do this? Who's going to take attendance? Who's going to do this? Who's going to have that role? And we spent so much time building structure, and creating
Yep.
rules and things that the students, it just did not, it didn't go well. People got uninterested. They wanted to jump into action, and then we had students that were on local school councils that had more experience, and that people, they wanted titles, they wanted to be
Oh
presidents
wow.
and things like that.
Right.
So it was we over the overstructure last year destroyed everything. So this year going in, I'm like, okay, no titles,
Yep.
no minute takers, totally organic. Like, what do you guys want to talk about? And we have last year had a bigger group,
Hmm.
less progress. It seems like
Right.
last year I was doing most of the stuff myself. I have 3 students. Our student body is like 1,000.
Oh, wow.
We
Okay.
have had more progress with
See.
3 students this year because I changed the structure because it
Right.
didn't work. So from school to school, it varies depending on your students, their personalities,
Hmm.
your administrator, just the culture and climate of the building. So no one school.
It's interesting because it's interesting because that it sometimes we as adults get in the way, right? Because in our mind it's like, oh, we're running this committee, or we're running this here, and so it should be done this particular way, and so we get so overwhelmed with the structure part. And the organic is sometimes, I wonder how the kids feel like when they see that organic. Do they really feel like you guys are really being real, you're really taking what they're saying into consideration, and it's not this structured thing? Because it probably almost feel like when it's too structured, like, oh, here's another classroom settings, and that classroom settings have a
Right.
hierarchy, and I'm down here and you're up here, right? And so it's
Mhm.
cool that you guys are making it organic, and then you see the results. um, are
Right.
you trying to implement that in other schools? So like, do the
Um,
schools kind of is there a team of liaisons across CPS schools that kind of connect and talk about the different methodologies that they use and work?
right. At the beginning of the year, they typically have a student voice meeting, like by networks or citywide. So you come to the meetings, of course, you talk about student voice and the vision and the thrust and what CPS wants, and you share out what you're doing at each individual school. And at some schools, people are soaring and they have tons of student reps and they're doing stuff.
Wow.
But then certain schools may have 2 or 3, or may
Oh,
have one, or it may be hard recruiting, or the principal really does not want it because when you start pulling in student voices, you have other people to please, and in addition to the
yeah.
CTU. So it becomes a thing like, okay, now I have more people to please, and I have more hoops to jump through. So yeah, we have those beginning of the year meetings, but we also have Zoom meetings with different
Okay.
trainings and go through the curriculum, and just people sharing out how to what they do, and practices that are proven for success. But just like, just like I shared, you can go through all of the structured stuff that CPS tells you to do in the curriculum,
And
but
instead of
if you go back to your school, the organic, you can soar with it. So you just never know until you get in the trenches and start doing stuff. You may
yep,
go through the curriculum and go through the book. And for me, a lot of times it just feels so structured. It was like, okay, this is not working. What do we
working.
want to talk about? What do we see here that needs to be improved? And let's start from there. Then the students will light up, and then you start rolling
Start
faster,
rolling with that. Right. And
trying
that
to
makes it
follow the
organic.
book.
Right, right. So how does like so when you talk about, these, the different schools, you being in different schools, how does culture and background and community really play in how students reflect? Like I hear you saying like being organic is one thing. Like I think that probably makes kids feel comfortable, right? And they feel like, okay, this is an open space.
Mhm.
And then when you add culture or kids' backgrounds and community, how does that play when it comes to students reflecting and expressing themselves?
Well, everybody's trying to bring their own vibe or culture to the meeting. It's everybody. You have your African American students, the way that they operate and the way they interact with each other. They're bringing their own spin.
Hmm.
And we may be having, because what we've seen the last couple of years is that the newcomers, people from Venezuela, people from migrating in,
Ah,
they have their own vibe, and
right.
the system of government that they're used to do, and what they can and cannot say. And we also have students from Europe, students from the
Okay.
Ukraine.
Wow.
So we have students from everywhere. Then you have and we have like different clubs and things at school. We have Christian club, we have LGBT club, we have so many so many different populations filtering in to everybody. Is well, just like kind of like politics.
Right.
Everybody wants to do things that is going to benefit them and benefit the students that they represent. But just kind of meshing everything together and getting all voices included. I think that's been challenging for us because, like I said, the students that I've been working with, they're three IB students, and in the beginning, we were doing recruitment. We worked with a youth outreach service, and they would come
Hmm.
in. Of course, we would set the table up in the lunchroom, have the candies and things and giveaways. But the people that signed up were, the IB students. So, we started
Ah,
planning. And what I found out that I didn't know is that a lot of these students, they don't even interact with the general population. They have their own set of classes, which are
really?
more structured, which are more high performance, and they don't even like mingle with the students who are in the regular programming that much. So even they made the comments, we need some different students. They're like, we're
Wow.
we're the IB students, but we want to hear what the other students think, or we think that they would be good, because you want your high performance students. You want the students who think nobody listens to them. You
Right.
even want the students who get in trouble all the time, because even they have a voice.
And even they have
So
a voice.
just kind of having the skills to facilitate that together and juggle those personalities and not let anybody overpower each other, and just kind of communicate that everybody's voice needs to be heard. And that's a skill that everybody can't do, because if
Right.
they're very powerful personalities, you can get overran. So
Exactly. Right. And that's and as I'm hearing you say this, I'm like, it's overwhelming me because I'm thinking like, oh my goodness, because you have all these different people, right? Cultural backgrounds and come from different communities. But it's interesting that you even said, like, even with the kids, they have separated themselves into little sub communities. And then now as the administration trying to advocate for all these different people, and
mhm.
what happens when the voice contradicts with one community versus the other, and navigating that, that's a lot, and I like the idea that you guys are listening, and then the clubs, are the clubs, so then do you guys meet with the clubs and then you actually get that feedback from each individual clubs as well, or is it just this one group of, all the students or representatives of the students that meet?
All right, all of the clubs are different. So all of them are different after school clubs, and we have so many different clubs. So, but we have a coordinator that kind of facilitates all of the regular after school clubs,
Uh-huh.
and just kind of connecting with him and seeing what's going on. And do you have any children that you think would be good for Student Voice? Or
Right.
also, I share an office with the STLS liaison. She is like the students that live in temporary living situations. So they come up and
Okay.
pick up their bus passes and
Right.
things about that. I asked her, hey, do you have some students that are living in temporary living situations that may be interested in Student Voice, because they have voices too.
Exactly.
So I just kind of vibe network with the different club facilitators, and just
Mhm.
to try to get somebody in photo club. Are there any artists? So just kind of network with the different teachers around who host clubs, and kind of see, do you have any students that you think would be a good fit for Student Voice?
Right. So one thing I'm interested in knowing, and I'm going to do a little shift here, is that I did a workshop recently at a school, and the kids were talking about they about the career. How do they tie their careers to actual lessons? And so I don't know, I know you're the student liaison and you're not actually in the classroom, but do you hear that? Is that a voice for kids? Are they concerned and worried about their careers, especially like the middle schools? And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm for sure they haven't even really thought about that, right? But when you get to high school, you're like, okay, the next level is college, and then you're on your way. You're setting the path for adulthood. So how are
Mhm.
kids expressing, especially with now with a lot of kids not wanting to go to college? Do they express, um, any anxiety or any concerns about my career path? Like, what is the school doing to help me with that? I wonder, I'm just kind of, at your particular school, do you hear anything about career paths and kids just trying to navigate the thought of even going to college?
I will start by saying that the model that public education uses is so outdated
Yes.
to it is ridiculous.
Yes. No, I feel that. So I'm gonna need you to elaborate for my listeners who's like, well, what does he mean? What is that? What does that really mean?
It's the real life application part. And I talk to my office mate with this all the time. And people say it all the time. Oh, I wish there was somebody that taught me how to balance a book. I wish there was somebody that taught me how to invest in the stock market, or to buy a house, or how to
Yes.
pay taxes. Or I think they, in the push to make everybody go to college, I
Mm-hmm.
think they remove so much stuff that would be beneficial to our children, and now they are not prepared.
Yes.
Um, so it's and of course, you ran at work all the time with your coworkers. It's like, we are in trouble. I will say that
Okay.
educationally in the United States, we are in trouble because they're not going to be ready. We have students who are going to college that they have to take remedial classes.
Wow.
I just was talking to one of my colleagues the yesterday, and Harvard is starting remedial math classes.
Really?
Um, it's we're behind, and globally, our children are behind, and just like in stuff they need to know. It's like, okay, we threw the trades away because you don't need to know how
Right.
to build anything. You don't need to know how to work on the car.
And
You
they
don't need
really need to bring the
carpentry.
vocational
You
schools
don't
back.
need so but I think now students are worried. But it was funny. I was just listening to a content creator, because I watch a lot of them. A lot
Uh-huh.
of a lot of the influencer thing.
All the kids want to do it.
Everybody
Yes.
thinks they can be an influencer. So
Yeah.
this is another one of worries of mine. So it's like, we got the college, we got the trades, and now
Uh-huh.
it's like everybody think they can be an influencer. And it's and I think, and what's funny is we had a career day, a job career fair at my school like not too long ago. And we had somebody there talking that was an influencer and teaching about it.
Really? Okay.
But they the young kids, they don't know, students don't know the work I think everybody shows the glamorous side of everything,
Yes,
especially on
and that's
social
the problem
media.
with social media. Yep.
But they think you can just make a video and
Uh-huh.
go viral
And go
and
on. That's
become rich.
it.
They're not thinking about editing. They're
Yes.
not thinking about how much money it takes to do all of this. So the students are, I think, some of my worry, the different demographics are, just like I said, the IB students. There's a different level of worry for an IB student than a regular student. Um, a regular student may think, oh, I'm just gonna be an influencer. I'm just gonna make TikToks, and
Right.
you call, okay, I got so and so in the hall doing a TikTok.
Mhm.
Go get them, and
Right.
then you have so there's a different level of worry, depending on what they're exposed to. Um, their academic level, where they are
Mm.
socially, but there is worry. But they don't understand how complicated life is. But I definitely think we are operating on an old, outdated model. We haven't talked about being a social influencer. We haven't talked about the stock market. Um, and it's just, yeah.
It's
So yeah.
interesting that you said that. I'm building a prototype that is using data that comes from the Department of Labor's comprehensive database on careers, and it's over 922 careers. But none of those careers is social media, because that content and that data is so old and it's not evolving with the kids, and so that becomes an issue. Especially even if you're unemployed, you go to the unemployment office and you take this particular survey, and the career recommendations that they're giving you, some of those careers are so outdated. And so that's part of the process that I'm working on, is like, how do we provide current career models that kids are actually interested in? Otherwise they're not going to actually pursue it. They're not going to actually, they're going to think it's, it's hopeless, and this is what I want to do, and I'm not going to try. And now I'm going to try to go down that path with limited information, instead of us saying,
Mhm.
okay, these are the current careers. What is that pathway?
Mhm.
Like you said, how do I become a successful content creator? Like, what is that? Am I being taught the different platforms to even edit a video? What does that mean, right? And so going through that process. And so that leads me to my next question, because one workshop that I did, and the student was saying how, they're not being prepared. And again, I agree with you that it is an outdated model. Should CPS, and I know it's so hard to change such a big structure model when you have a big district like CPS, but even with any school system, even the small charter schools, should there be a pivotal move to career focused content? And not so much where it's necessarily saying, okay, you have to finish school and go off to trade school, but maybe there is a pathway towards trade school, or maybe there is a pathway to college, but then contextualizing this information. I had a kid that say, well, I want to be a barber, but I hate science. Right.
Mhm.
And so no one's contextualized that you need to understand science. There's pH levels, there's chemicals, there's all of that. But he hates science, but he wants to deal with hair, right? And so there's a scientific part of that job that you need to understand. But
Right.
we're not contextualizing that in the classroom. And
Mhm.
so my question to you is, do you think that if the school system did a shift and made the contacts more like career focused? If I'm teaching math, this particular math, what are the careers that I can use this for, so that kids can kind of relate? Oh, you're teaching me, measurements. I want to be a
Mhm.
carpenter. Oh, there's a match. Or you're teaching me math and you're teaching me measurements. I want to go to culinary school, right? And so I need to
Mhm.
understand that. Do you think that would be effective?
Absolutely, because you need to know, where am I going to use it? Because for me, and I was just talking about this the other day, it's like, I had to take trigonometry, had
Mm-hmm.
to take statistics, and and all this stuff, and I was like, okay, this I use, this
Uh-huh.
I've never used. So it's like, you need to make it applicable. And
Yes.
so I think that it would hook students a little bit more, because now I know I'm not just sitting in this classroom just listening to some outdated stuff that I'm never going to use. And like, oh, I did sanitation. Oh, that's science. Yeah, you
Right.
got to sanitize, else somebody gonna have a bunch of bumps on the back of
Exactly.
their head, and you're
Right.
cutting it. And so it's like, so I do think if a better job was done of connecting the curriculum to real life, I think you would I think you get a bigger bang for your buck. But then um, who would have the skills to do that?
Right.
Because everybody can't do that. There are some people that are good teachers. And there are some people that are just good at disseminating information. So
Right.
you got to have that balance in your building.
Right.
Um, but then and there's another problem. You have, and I love them. I've been union forever. You got teachers unions that
Right.
you got to deal with that whole piece. And around that, it's like,
Right.
oh, okay, you're trying to bring these people that are non-union in to teach
Uh-huh.
that.
Hmm.
But if you're not in the industry and you're just teaching textbook and you don't know how to connect it,
Right.
then there needs to be some type of partnership, or there needs to be some way that you can graft people in that are in the workforce that are showing that these concepts are used every day
Yes.
on the job. So it's kind of just like, again, it's a balancing act, and it's the legalities of it. And it's just, you once you open Pandora's box of
That's
changing
it.
something, it's like then everything pops out. So definitely would be uh, beneficial, definitely is needed. However, the work that it would take to do is an arduous task.
And it's so disfortunate because and I understand the purpose of unions, and I understand, I've already, went to school, and to be a teacher, and I went through this process to do that. And now you want to shift and change or bring in the practicality that I don't have. But at some point, we need to make a decision on what's more important, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
it making sure that we send kids from our schools well equipped, right, to be successful? Because again, we're getting older, and the kids that we're producing are going to take over, right? And
Right.
so it becomes that thing. It's like, how do we get the administration, how do we get the school district, how do we, you continue to go up? And I would say the United States Department of Education, but hey, right, so how do you get to the top level to say that this here for is at the detriment of our country, that we
Mm-hmm.
actually, however, it's going to hurt, there's going to be some bumps to make that change because our kids are suffering. And it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting that you said that the kids are coming out unprepared, and when I really feel like we do a lot of standardized testing for the kids. And so how is that possible? Right. And so
Mm-hmm.
that becomes a whole thing, because I know, like, standardized test is a thing. We force it on the kids, which I am not the biggest fan. Well, yeah, not the biggest fan of, because I feel like you're taking, a moment in time, and you're
Mm-hmm.
stuck. You're testing a child. You don't know if that
Mm-hmm.
child didn't eat last night, their parents fought last night, daddy got shot, mama went to jail. You don't know what those circumstances are, and then you're going to test that child, and how that child does on that test. You're going to say that's who they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem for me. Right? But it's weird for you to say that they're not prepared when we focus so much on standardized tests. It is insane. Like, you have these self-reportings, and how did they do it? I mean, I feel like at one point I was like, I feel like it's getting worse with tests, that we're almost teaching, we're preparing our kids to take tests versus providing learning for our kids so that they can be successful.
I think and I think for me, if you're getting to college level and you got to go in remedial classes, for me that communicates the basics. I think the
Right.
just the children don't know how to read and do basic math, and it's like, for me, like I'm a big handwriting person, because I used to, years ago, my handwriting was horrible. I got F's in handwriting and D's, and then like I set myself out. I practice and practice
Gonna
and
get,
practice and
yes.
practice, and I love to write cursive and handwriting now. And even like when they're, the students are signing, they don't know how to sign their
Yes,
names.
I've heard that.
They print everything, and stuff, instances where they have to sign. I'm looking like, you didn't sign your name, and they're like, I don't know how. Or
Right.
something where they need to put their whole name, they'll just put their first name, and I look back and no, these are seniors. And I'm like, and they're leaving. I'm like, wait, like, you didn't put your whole name. they're like, oh, I had to,
Yes. But
you're
see, they took
18.
cursive out of the school, right? I know they were talking about
And
taking cursive out of the
oh,
school.
they took it out. They're trying to bring it back now, but just knowing that they have to write their first and not even sign,
Right.
to know that on this legal document, like an early dismissal form,
Right.
if they, have to leave, they're 18 and they can legally go and, get an appointment at DMV or
Right.
get a passport or something like that. Just writing their first name and not catching like, wait. I said, you have to write your entire name. I'm like, look at the box. It says name, it
Right.
says time, it says
Right.
date, it says reason, it says signature. And they're thinking, oh, I can just put my first name
Because when you
and
ask
it's
me what my
fine.
name is, I say my name is Selena. I'm not giving you my full name. And I
Right.
wonder,
And I'm
okay,
like, so
here.
just the common knowledge of not knowing that I have to write my first and last name, that I need to sign, that I need to be able to complete this form that is a legal document. It's like, it's just basic stuff like that, and reading fluently. And I just think the basics. I don't think it's the complicated stuff. I just think
Right.
students are leaving not even knowing the basics. And for me, that is startling, because if you can't read to comprehend,
Right.
you can't do too much for
Exactly.
me,
And then
because
you're at that age where you're able to sign legal documents. And if you can't read and you can't understand that, that becomes the whole thing. Or if you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to open up your own barbershop or salon, you can't even go through that. You don't know how. So those are those bumps that you got to go through because you was not prepared. Now, when we talk about like student voices, I know within the schools, do you guys ever like talk to kids that actually graduated to kind of get a reflection on what their experience like? Okay, now I finished school, I went off to college, and then here's what I wish you guys could have done better, because I feel like that's a voice. I mean, you're saying it because you probably are interacting with the kids and following the kids onto college, but on a larger level,
Mhm.
I wonder, like, do CPS make an effort to, like, now we've sent kids out, how do we learn from those kids? How do we take those voices and say this is what we need to improve?
Right now, so this is my third year of high school, and I do know that the school that I am, they have an alumni network, but
Oh,
I'm
cool.
not sure
Okay.
if they're asking those
If they ask
particular
those type of
questions.
questions.
But for
Hmm.
me, since I've worked in elementary school, I've bumped into students in high school that I've had elementary school with, and I used to, and when I was at the elementary school level, I always had them come visit, because when they graduate out of grammar school, they come back, and they're like, everything you told me was true, because I was the
Yeah.
mean
Yeah,
person.
yes.
Um, and so
It's
and I
like the
would tell
mean
them,
parent. Yep, I'm
right,
so glad my mama and my daddy was mean.
and I would tell them like, well, you need to know how to do this, because when you get to high school, they're gonna figure that, oh, you're a teenager, you should know how to do this, you should know
Right.
how to do that. I'm not gonna hold your hand, and people are not gonna care as much. They used to say, oh, Miss McCain, you always so mean, and then they would always come back and they say, you know what, you were right. And they
Mm.
were like, they don't care as much. And I said, I told you. I said, you were telling me I was mean. I was getting you ready
Getting you
for high
prepared.
school level. And just like, my high school is now, 18 is the magic age.
Right.
I can sign myself out of school. Do you have to call my mother?
Right.
Yeah, I'm still gonna call.
Right.
Some of them, okay, I changed my mind. Other ones, oh, but 18 is the magic
Number.
number. And I said, just like our parents told us, I said, when you get out there, you're gonna wish you can come back. And
Exactly.
I had this conversation with with one of my assistant principals today. I think the way that the world is now, the government, I said, this is one of the worst times to become a young adult for me. To be graduating into
Mhm.
this world from high school, so many things are being repealed, so many freedoms are being peeled
Yes.
back,
They've
so
been
many
taken.
laws
Yeah.
are being, I said, the economy is
Right.
trash. I said, you're rushing to get
Hmm.
out there, and
And
this is
don't know
not the
what's
best time for you to go out there. So slow down. But they never want to hear slow down.
right.
But they want to get out there. So this is the conversation I'm having now. And one thing that we did in Student Voices, we went over student data, like because CPS has school report cards. Everything is public knowledge, and
Right.
the students don't know. They don't know where the data goes from the surveys, and we're like, okay. let's go to the school report card
So
and
we can
see
see.
what the data says about our school. And they're looking, their eyes get big, and they're like, "Oh."
Right.
I'm like, "Yeah, you see those attendance rates?
Mhm.
You see those achievement rates? You see what the students answered on this My School, My Voice, Do I Feel Safe?" I guess, because people, we over test them and over
Yeah.
survey them so much. I guess they think the information just goes in there, but I'm like, no, this is
You
public
check it.
information, and
Yes.
it's used to grade your school and to see what you think. And a lot of them were kind of shocked at the
Mm.
achievement levels and what people were saying. It was like, but I don't think that if they weren't in Student Voice, that they would have been able to go over that information. And
Wow.
even something as simple as school washrooms have always been terrible.
Right.
But we're like, oh, we're gonna we need to fix the washrooms. We need to paint that. Well, you do know there's a contract. There are certain contractors with CPS, and you can't just go in and paint the walls a different color. You can't just go into money and like, oh, I'm about to take this money and we're gonna do the bathroom. No,
Right.
Prince, we gotta talk to the capital department. You gotta talk to these people that's downtown. You gotta put in order for this. It has to be in a budget. This may take 3 months out of the 10.
Right.
So them understanding just
All
how
of
complicated school is and to get things done, they were like, oh, so you just can't get a new lock on the doors that are
right.
tore up on the washroom? Oh no, it
There's
gotta
a
be
whole
new.
there's a whole process, right?
It's a whole
And it's cool that you're actually allowing them to understand so that they know, because sometimes when you don't know, then you just assume, why didn't you guys do this here? But there's all this bureaucracy that goes into the process. It really stops progression. I feel like even when like even with the kids saying, okay, or even administrations and teachers knowing like, okay, our kids are going out into this world, they're not prepared for careers, they don't they don't know some of the basic things, how
Mhm.
quickly, because that's that whole reflection thing. Like, we see what happened, now how quickly can we pivot and correct that? And so it's all about correction, but how long does it take? But then in the meantime, how many kids are we losing, especially in
Right.
marginalized area? It's so sad to kind of really hear that, you have these things in place that should protect, administrations and teachers and all of that, but then sometimes those things that you have in place is detrimental to the children. And I want to say there is no excuse for us to continue to teach this old industrial way of teaching, right? That's just
Mhm.
there is no excuse for that. But even with just understanding like the kids' voices, and how do you actually respond quickly to those voices, becomes an issue. And so if you
Mhm.
had one piece of advice to, educators who wanted to, amplify students' voice through reflection, or actually make sure that these things are implemented, what would you say?
I would say ask. A
Okay.
lot of times we don't ask the questions, we're afraid of the answers. Um, and especially as in the school system as educators, because the educators can become super critical of administrators, the principals. And I think part of the fear is that, oh, if I ask or I give them a voice, they're going to be super critical of us. Because
Right,
and I've heard, in passing, you hear these discussions among teachers. It's like, oh, the students are they saying this and they're saying that.
right.
So a lot of educated teachers don't want them to have a voice
Mhm.
because I can say this person is not teaching me anything. Of
Right.
course, in moments of anger,
And it
you've heard
happens sometimes,
you've
right?
heard
Right. So you
students
have to be able to,
explode.
right. You have to be
She's
able to filter
not
those
teaching
out.
me. Like, she's not teaching me anything. I go in there every day and this and that. And you want to do this,
Right.
but you also know that when students are lying and when they aren't.
Right.
And you'd be like, okay. So asking them the question, like, as a teacher, like, what do you think about my class?
Right.
What do you
Right.
think I could do better? Are you understanding? Uh,
Are you understanding, or can you relate this information to? So I'm teaching this here. What do you think you can use this for? Right.
I don't think people are asking the questions because they're afraid they'll have to come out of their own boxes, or they may be challenged to do more
Right.
and push harder, because sometimes just going along with the regular routine is easy.
It's easy.
I teach my do. The 10 months pass and I'm on summer break and do, and it
Right.
becomes a cycle. And I'm not learning, even though I'm going through my constant professional development and things are like that. It becomes routine. But when I'm not asking my customers, if my customers don't get it,
Yes.
it's not
I'm
effective.
not doing my job, right? That's a good point, and I like that acts. And so that is and I think what you described is fear. And so acts is a great thing, but then I guess the question becomes, how do we get our teachers and administrators and even our students, because our students should be asking as well, when you're being taught this information. Now, what can I do this? What can I use this information for, instead of being this box of just receiving information and it not being because I feel like learning is this two-way process, right? And so it has to be active learning and not passive learning. But it is that
Mhm.
thing where you're fearful. And so how do we get the administration, the teachers, the staff, everyone to come out of the fear and start to act? So I like that, Antoine.
It
All
is,
right.
and I think, and you
Go
said
ahead.
the magic word fear.
Yes.
Their teachers are afraid of, because teaching is a hard job. I'm not
Right.
going to knock it, because I've been
Oh, I
working
agree.
in the teaching field for 20 years. Everybody's not built for it. You
Mhm.
have people that have shifted careers out of corporate and went to teaching and went right back,
Went back
because
to court.
it's not for the faint of heart.
Yes.
But the fear is that even though I'm being asked to do more, even though I have to take these papers home, even though
Right.
I have to spend all my extra money, the fear is being asked to do more, and I already do so much. So,
Right.
anytime people are asked to change or learn something new or implement something new, or whether that's a tardy system or new curriculum. So you mean I got to do some more, or
Or
like
I have to do
social?
more work. Exactly.
So social, oh, we need a social emotional component in the classroom. Well, when am I going to have time to do that? So
Right.
that is a lot of what you have going on in education as well.
Wow. So with that, what would be, so that's that message really. And I think X is for everybody. But then for the students, what would be one thing that students can do today to begin making sense of who they are becoming? Because at the end of the day, is really that's what it's about. It's really about the students. Like you have this bureaucracy, you have all these structures, all of these other things, but at the end of the day, it's about the students and making
Mhm.
them be their career self. Who are they, what career identity that they get. And so what is one thing that students can do today to begin making sense of who they are or who they want to become?
I would say write write out a plan. I'm
Love it.
very big on writing and journaling.
Mhm.
And what's funny is, like, one of the things I did with the Student Voice, I brought them like little journals for them
Mhm.
to write down their observations of everything that they see in the school, whatever it is, whether it's a teacher, whether
Uh-huh.
it's the paint chipping off the wall. Just write it and write their plan. What do you want to do? It's like, what
Right.
do I want to do?
I
Because
love
we all have something that we want to do when we grow up. And
right.
just journaling and writing and thinking about it, and how can I do it, and who can I help me, and who can I share it with,
And who can I
uh
share? Right. I
who can
love
be my
that.
mentor. i don't
Exactly.
think I don't think they ask themselves those questions enough, and we don't write it, because if what I've learned as a writer, that if you don't write it and you can't put it in front of you,
Mhm.
if it's just in here,
And you're not getting
you're
it
gonna
out.
forget about it,
Exactly.
and nobody can hold you accountable for it.
Right.
So I ask things like, with even adults, I'm like, okay, what's your plan? What's your 30, 60, 90
Right.
day plan? And share it with somebody. So, and I think starting freshman year, best year to do it. I mean, coming in
Yeah.
from eighth
You're
grade,
fresh.
you
You're
have
still
to grab them.
right.
You got to grab them, especially the ones who have had challenges in eighth grade, because they're
Right.
coming in thinking, I'm gonna have all this freedom,
Yes.
I'm going in the halls. And if nobody grabs them and
Right.
shows them the ropes and try to gives them the tools, they're gonna mess up their first year,
First year. Yep.
and be trying to catch up for the
Right.
rest of the 3 years. So asking them, well, what do you want to do?
I
Let's write it
love that.
down.
I think everybody, that's a great point. I love that. Everyone should get a journal. Freshman year, start off, because it would be interesting, as we talk about reflection and voice, like how have you transformed over the years, right? Because I'm always talking about kids are evolving continuously, and so that you have to continuously come back and, okay, now let's reevaluate, let's shift, right? Because they're changing so much. But it would be interesting if all the kids got a journal for their freshman year, and they are responsible for keeping it up to their senior year to do, and so they can kind of reflect. So one of the prototypes, the prototype that I am creating, not one of the prototypes, the prototype that I am creating for these kids, it actually have a journaling aspect in that. And I'm so glad that you said that, because and what I'm doing is I'm leveraging AI. And so basically, it kind of probe the child to kind of, because a lot of times I really believe, like, when kids don't write, it's because they don't know what to say. And so this particular, feature in the platform, it says, like, how was your day? Now, as a mom, that your kid is going to say it was okay. Well, what does that mean, right? And and then in continuously having conversations with that particular child, having that information. So then, like, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, well, how was your week? It was okay. Well, I remember you telling me that you had math. How did that go? Did you study? And so now it's an opportunity to kind of probe the kids beyond, what they're getting in their environments. Because I know a lot of times parents just don't ask. And when they do ask, they say, once you say it's okay, that's fine. So my son, he's homeschooled, but I took him to, science is not my thing. So I took him to a school that do 101 teachers, a 101 ratio, and they taught them chemistry. And so every day I pick him up and I was like, how was your day? It was fine. Well, what does fine mean? Right. And he's like, oh, mom. Yeah. Oh, mom, let's have this. And then eventually he realized that when I get in this car, she's going to ask me, and I need to be prepared, and she's going to have follow-up questions. And so that trained him to know. And then also, I believe that while he was in class, he was probably thinking about it, because he would get in the car and I was like, how was your day? So we talked about this here, and then I was like, yes, right. But if you don't probe the kid, if you don't further ask the child the question, how do they do that, right? It becomes this thing of, like, you need to have your child reflect on what they've learned. And so I'm a grandmother, so my grandkids, they hate that, right? So they know if I pick them up from school, when you get in the car, the first thing I'm going to say was, how was your day? And if you said it was okay, or it was bad, it was good, thank you for that. So now tell me why it was that way, right? If it was good, why was it good? If it was bad, why was it bad, right? And so it's that idea of starting, if you continuously do that with the child, just like the journaling, like you saying, show it to the child. But even with that, like, if I'm asking the child questions, I'm able to get more feedback. And now I'm making them think, because they know that I'm going to ask that question. And sometimes they want to share, like you said earlier, they want to share. But if you're not asking the questions, they don't have an answer, right? If you're not probing to figure out, like, what was going on, or what did you learn? There was an instance where he was like, well, it wasn't interesting. Well, why wasn't interesting, right? And so let's talk about that. And what does that mean? Like, were you able to contextualize that information and understand what it correlates to? Or if not, if so, then okay, it's possible that it just wasn't interesting to you. Or were you not able to associate it with anything, so you didn't understand it? And so, yeah. And so those are the things that we need to be asking our kids. But even also, like, what can you use that information for? Who do you want to be? And then once you have an idea, even if they know, you can continuously ask them, like, oh, so how do you think math, relates to whatever it is that they want to be? And so continuing that process. But that journaling thing is a great thing. And that's something, that's why I put it into our feature, because we want to kind of continuously ask the kids the questions that the parents just don't ask, that, for whatever reason, either they don't know, maybe their parents didn't ask them. It could be that generational thing of no one inquiring about what you had going on. But then that idea, and so I know people are so scared of AI, but this is an opportunity to leverage it, because guess what? It can store the information, it can ask the questions, it knows, you can train it to say this is how this kid responds. And now you have this dialogue where the child is now opening up and start thinking about things that they probably wouldn't have thought about because nobody asked them a question. Right.
Right.
And so then you can
Right.
reflect. Like, so the thing with the journaling, like if you had it the freshman year and then the senior year, or even like maybe the junior year, because maybe the freshman year, like you said, maybe they got in trouble and now they've made a shift, maybe sophomore year and junior or beginning of junior year, they can go back and say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, look where I was and look where I am now. I can
Right.
do that, right? And
Right.
so that's a
Absolutely.
great thing. I like that. Somebody needs to be giving all the kids journals or come to my
They do.
platform. They do.
They
Okay.
they need no, they don't, but they need to journal, they need to write, because for me, like, of course, I have a million little notebooks, and and you
Right.
look back, and like I do, at the beginning of the year, like, oh,
Right.
January 1st, I'm writing what I did, and I do it intentionally so that I can look back.
Mhm.
Or like on my birthday, I'll get up, first person who send me a birthday message, first person I talked to, first person I
Oh,
saw.
I need to make sure I'm the first person.
Right. It's like documenting. So I think that is so important. And I think we need to do it. And it also is a tool to help them become better writers as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because our kids do not write. And it's when you talk about, my son wrote a book, and when we would go out to these little pop-up places for him to sell the books. And when the kids, they was like, you wrote a book? And I'm like, yeah, you can write a book too, right? And
Mhm.
they're so amazed because they think because they're kids, you can't
Right.
achieve that. Oh, yes, you
Right.
can. Absolutely.
Mhm.
You can do it. How old are you? Can you write?
Right.
Can you read? Yes, you can do it. And so
Absolutely.
that is that thing. And that's a great ending to this session. Journaling. So if you're listening to this here and you are part of administration, or you're a parent, or you're a teacher, or if you just know a kid, buy them a journal, have them start to self-reflect, have them start writing about, their day-to-day and things, because a lot of times we have that stuff built up in us and we need to release it. So yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you, Antwan. I really enjoyed you on this
Yeah.
podcast, and hopefully there's something that you said can help, administration even kind of consider and look at things, or teachers and students. And so again, thank you for joining us, and we really appreciate you for taking your time today.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate talking about it.
Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Pathways and Possibilities. If this conversation resonates with you, whether you are an educator, a designer, a funder, or a parent, I hope you'll continue walking with us as we explore how to create systems that serve all students. Now, you can learn more about my research and the work at Let Design Innovate by visiting www.letdesigninnovate.org. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's next, including a conversation with experts in either the education field or professionals who deal with education. If you believe in this work and you want to help expand access for more students, please consider making a donation at letdesigninnovate.org/donate. Every contribution helps us more, one step closer to equity in career learning. Until next time, keep imagining, keep listening, and keep designing futures that reach beyond limits.